John Claymore here, and this right here is part 2 of BRT versus WRT. Now granted, I am using the abbreviations for the actual term. Main reason why I'm doing that is seeing how it's the first 30 seconds of this video. We don't want to get one of those nice little labels that YouTube decides to put on your channel anytime you release a video that touches a certain topic. Now gang, in that video there, I discussed the black abortion rate and the black birth rate, and basically explained to you guys why it was that, given the fact that the black abortion rate was so high and that the black birth rate was so low, that it's more than likely possible that it's actually black people being replaced and not white people being replaced per the actual demographic in the country, especially given the border crisis, with which, by the way, you guys are seeing some photos and some video footage of now. Now guys, with that right there being said, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now what this video here is going to be focused on. We're going to be focusing in on crime, murder rate, Democrat mayors, the cities themselves, and we're also going to be focusing in on riots and how it is it serves to intensify the agenda. Now, with that right there being said, guys, if you're new to this channel, make sure you guys go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy what it is that you have to hear, or you will at least be very interested in what is actually being said. And you will also, if of course you are a person of color, you may even wake up to what's actually going on, the sad reality of what's going on with our current government and the agendas that are going on across the world, mainly the agenda to exterminate an entire race. Now guys, with that right there being said, as I mentioned before, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Also hit that like button if you're new to this channel for the algorithm. I would love to get your thoughts in the comments section. Make sure you guys leave them there, and let's go ahead and dive into this. Alright guys, before we go any further, I want to do a little bit of a recap really quick on exactly how the racial demographics go. Now, if you type in racial demographics in the U.S., you're going to get 12.2% is black. Now guys, really quick, in some of these demographic studies that you type in, like right now, like if you type in racial demographics in the U.S., you're going to get sometimes different actual percentages. Check this one out. This right here is Wikipedia. This right here is 2020. Sometimes the categories change. Now, the category, the black population, has normally remained somewhere between 11.6 and 13.6% of the population. Right here it's 12.4, and of course 12.6 is the population right now. There's another one right here, 2020 U.S. Census says 12.1%. Fact of the matter is, African Americans are no longer the dominant minority. It is now officially Hispanics, and I've been saying for a while that what's really going on is that the Democratic Party, the current Democratic Party, is trying to replace African Americans with Hispanics. That's the brand new voter group. But of course, I also explained towards the end of that last video that that particular plan is backfiring. Now guys, I want to give you guys a bit of a heads up. This video right here is going to be it's going to be a while. This is actually going to be a relatively lengthy video. We're going to be looking at actual studies from Pew Research. We're also going to be looking at the actual crime rates in each big city. That section probably won't be that long. But I want you to know something really quick. Most of these large cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, they've been ran by Democrats for years. And we're also going to look at the rural to, urban black population as far as its big cities. And I'm going to need to go ahead and break that down for you right now. When you type in how much of the U.S. population is urban, you're probably going to get a relatively high number. However, when you actually dissect that number, you find out that that number drastically decreases by number of person in population. Let me explain what I mean. I live in an urban area which has about 115,000, 120,000 people. That right there will be classified as urban. However, that is not the same as, say, New York, where you got 8.5 million people live there. It's not the same as Chicago. It's not the same as LA. Obviously, small towns get factored into the equation, and America is full of small towns. As a matter of fact, your small town ratio is very, very large, and the actual number itself is extremely large. And I've had to explain to those who, at least those online who are European, who don't seem to understand that America is more than just its big cities. For whatever reason, people look at America, they think New York, they think Chicago, they think DC. No. Most of America's population is located in rural and small towns. That is where most of America is located at. So we're going to be looking at that percentage as well. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, guys. Let's start with the FBI. This right here is the infamous Table 43A, 2019. Now, granted, this is a few years old, but still at the same time, though, I'm pretty sure by the time you get through looking at some of this chart, you'll kind of sort of get what I'm where I'm going at. Now, you'll see total crimes, total arrests, anyways. You will also see, of course, racial category. The overall total is 6.8 million. Whites is 4.7 million. Now, really quick, nobody has ever denied that white people commit crime. Of course they commit crime. They commit crime at very high rates as well. So do Hispanics and so do Native Americans, especially considering population. The reason why people zone in on the African American population is because the percentage distribution as far as the actual country size itself, as you guys have seen, only about 12.2 to 12.6% of the population. In some demographics, it's been noted as low as 11.6, as I mentioned earlier. When you have a lower percentage of the population, but yet you have this level of arrest, and that right there would suggest that, well, it feels like a race may be exiting itself off, and of course Democrats are currently replacing said race with new race, being from South America and Mexico. Now, this right here is one of the main reasons why I've spoken about the fact that I don't think it's white people being replaced, because while white crime is high, they're not killing each other off at ridiculous rates. We'll go further down the rabbit hole during the course of this video. But you guys can see this chart, which, by the way, will be in the description box of this video. Now, look, murder, non-negligent manslaughter. As you can see, that's a pretty high number, 3,650 for whites, but 4,078, but yet it's a smaller portion of the population. Now, many people love to point to the statistic, 13% of the population, 57% of the crime. When you actually narrow down the number, it looks a little bit, it doesn't look exactly the same. However, when you actually dig into the numbers, it's a lot worse. This right here is total arrests. Now, 4,078. American Indian, 125. Asian, 83. Native Pacific Islander, 28. Now, check this one out. Rape. Whites, it seems to me that whites commit a lot of aggravated assault. They commit a lot of burglary. They commit a lot of larceny, a lot of theft. Then again, at the same time, they're being around a bunch of poor white people who've been living in very, very rundown areas. I can kind of see that. A lot of people do get arrested, especially in county areas and very, very poor white communities. However, when you look at the actual honest-to-God statistics, once again, overall numbers bearing with the actual population size itself, meaning the actual percentage of the African-American population, the number immediately becomes magnified. So while 91,164 for aggravated assault, while that right there may be damn near half of what whites are, it automatically magnifies much, much larger once you look at the fact that African Americans are only about 12% of the population. Now, guys, I'm going to say 12% of the population because, as I mentioned in part one, parts of the population are at 11.5, 11.6%. And, of course, you just saw one while ago that said 12.6%. So the number actually varies. Either way, though, it's below 13% of the total U.S. population at this moment in time. So when you see numbers like 4,078 for murder, non-negligent manslaughter, when you see 4,400 for rape, like I said, I am not under any circumstances dismissing this number over here. That's still very, very high. As a matter of fact, this right here is the one that I hate the most. You see, murder sometimes can also be classified as murder, even though it was really just self-defense. Of course, that right there is something that you will find out when you actually talk to an inmate itself and you actually dig into the weeds there. Fact of the matter is that when you look at the amount of crime, the amount of violent crime, when you look at the crimes that are being committed, when you take that and you add that and you ratio that out to the proportion of the population size itself, the actual honest-to-God percentage of the population, it automatically magnifies itself. It's one of the main reasons why we talk about black-on-black crime being such a very big deal. Also, something else too, I didn't actually look at total arrests over here with Hispanics. That's relatively high too. However, once again though, when you compare towards overall population size and overall population percentage of the country itself, the number is a little bit lower. Just figure I would throw that out there. And of course, immigration itself is probably going to be a separate project. We talk about assimilation and non-assimilation and what exactly happens when it comes to the economy. Now, really quick, I am going to go ahead and throw this out here, and I want to go ahead and make this part perfectly clear. In some of these areas, mostly Los Angeles is mainly the big one. There's also cities in Texas like Houston, Dallas. You'll see it in San Francisco, and even some of the cities in the Midwest and East Coast, and a lot even in southeastern U.S. Let me throw this out here. Why do you think that some of these places where low-skilled labor is preferred, why do you think it is that they're wanting Spanish speakers? Why is that the case? Well, they're importing more and more Hispanics. Well, if you have more and more Hispanics, which, by the way, I still believe that if you're going to come to America, you need to learn English. You have to learn it. I mean, look, I was in the military for 4 years, and if there's one thing that we used to harp on, especially to guys who spoke Spanish, was make sure you speak English when you're giving orders so that way people can understand. I mean, if we're under fire, you can't be speaking your native language. You have to be speaking the language that everybody else pretty well perceives or pretty well knows within the platoon or within the unit, obviously for coordination purposes. But you got to think about something really quick. If Hispanics are being brought over and they're taking all the low-skill jobs, taking all the low-wage jobs, then what does that do? That actually puts black people out who are more likely to take those jobs or more likely to get those jobs. So if you are replacing black people at the workplace with Hispanics, then that right there just made black people at this moment in time much, much more government reliant. And let's go ahead and throw this out here. Now, there's an argument that people have about whether crime drives the poverty or whether poverty drives the crime. Either way, both, if you look into it, both are pretty freaking bad. Now, I personally don't choose to take a side in that particular argument because it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of poverty in these areas, and there's a lot of crime in these areas, and a lot of violent crime. So at the end of the day, you got to fix the poverty and the crime both. Doesn't matter, you got to fix them both. Now, why in the world would you have so much poverty? Well, you got a lot of people on government assistance. And of course, that poverty, of course, people, crime kind of comes out of that. And of course, in some cases, poverty comes out of the crime. As I said before, it seems to me like you could probably take the argument for both. But then again, though, I will entertain that definitely in the comment section if you want to kind of throw that out there. Either way, though, the more people who are going on government assistance, the more likely the crime is eventually going to go up because you're not getting that much from the federal government. And therefore, at the same time, you may be desperate to take care of your kids, to feed those mouths. You may be desperate to do some very, very bad things. I mean, look at this real quick. Larceny and theft is still pretty high. I mean, motor vehicle theft is still pretty high. I mean, violent crime, that is very high. Property crime is very high. I mean, you got to think about stuff like that. I mean, a lot of times, some pretty bad crap does happen. And, of course, the crime is obviously going up, and a lot of this has got to do with the conditions. But that's one of the reasons why we're going to be speaking about the Democrat-ran cities here in this actual lecture, because even though it's going to be coming up towards the end, I think you guys may want to actually take a look at that as well, because you see there's this great big divide between those who live in small towns, those who live in rural areas versus African Americans who live in big cities. Let's go ahead and get to the next chart. This is from the Daily Signal. Now, I know I said I was going to do a chart, but don't worry, the chart's going to come afterwards because we're going to look at the Pew Research Center because they've always had some very, very good findings. They had some of the better findings when it came to actual gun deaths in the country, which, by the way, were proven to mostly be suicides. Either way, though, we're going to be going to Pew here shortly, but let's go ahead and take a look at this. Black homicide rates are back at 90s levels. The problem isn't the guns. Now, before we go any further, a few very, very key things happened in the 90s. Number one, you had the crime bill. The crime bill locked up a lot of black men. It damn near put away an entire generation of black men, which, by the way, is weird because the person who introduced that bill is your current president of the United States, Joe Biden. Also, something else, too, in a lot of your bigger cities, especially in New York, when David Dinkins was the mayor, the black crime rate was shooting up through the roof. And we'll probably look at 90s crime rates amongst African Americans here very soon because it looks like there is a lot of correlations. But don't worry, we'll be looking at Pew, we'll be looking at that, we'll be looking at the cities themselves. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. The left loves to talk about disparate impact until it interferes with its narratives. A recently released study found that homicide rates for black men have shot back up to extremely high levels in the early 90s. If black lives truly matter, stemming the sudden explosion of violent crime where black men are primarily the victims should be a priority. It doesn't help acknowledging the reasons for a sudden surge. Of course, many on the left deny that there is any crime wave at all. It's all a conspiracy theory concocted by Fox News and Republicans, they say. Some crimes did go down during the COVID-19 pandemic, but violent crime in the United States shot up dramatically. And it stayed up in many places. It reached levels not seen in decades. Now, before we go any further with JAMA open and we look at the rest of this, I want to go ahead and throw this out here. Why do you think violent crime occurs? People are stealing crap. People are taking things. A lot of meanness. A lot of people who are, quite frankly, not trying to go back to work. Violent crime did shoot up because a lot of places shut down their businesses. Now, you can blame that on lockdowns. You can blame that on the President of the United States who did shut things down. I personally was not in favor of that. I personally was in favor of shutting things down at a limited capacity, but allowing those who were safe and those who were well-being to go back to work. I was actually up for that. But when you have the President of the United States saying, hey, look, let's open the state back up, and you got the governor of New York saying, no, we're not going to open back up. You got the governor of Illinois saying, look, we're not going to open back up. By the way, New York and Illinois are pretty heavily populated states. Same thing in the state of California. Whereas in Georgia and Florida, they were opening back up. That also says something else, too. Because when you actually dug into the actual crime rates at that time, the murder rates in those cities, it was the bluer areas that were actually way worse. They were the areas that had shot up, and I'm pretty sure you guys know why. People weren't going back to work because the governors and the mayors had practically shut those areas down, and as a result of that, what happens? Violent crime ends up going up, robberies end up going up, larceny goes up, and even murders. JAMA Network Open Journal concluded that gun homicide rates among black men have exploded. The study concluded that about 55% of men were killed by firearms per 100,000. 55 black men were killed by firearms per 100,000. Far beyond any other demographic group in America. Now, like I said before, bear in mind, black population is a much, much smaller portion of the population. It's not even the dominant minority in the country. This is one of the reasons why we rail against black-on-black crime. It concerns us because we don't want to see an entire race completely wipe itself off the earth. These numbers match those seen in the early 90s when violent crime was generally much higher. Nearly 2 decades of declining violent crime rates were wiped out in just a few years. Now check this out. This right here was for, as you guys can see, the overall crime rates themselves. And of course, you see suicide right here in the center, okay? This right here, overall rate. This right here would be actual fatalities, meaning those who actually shot one another, probably in anger. Let's see what we got here. And this, my guy, the rate of gun homicides among black men is right back to where the height of the early 90s wave of violence. Keep that in mind the next time someone tries to minimize the current resurgence. So, 60 per 100,000 black. And of course it was up, and all of a sudden it shot right back down, and then of course it shot right back through the roof. Hispanics actually shot all the way down. It was relatively high and then went right down, as you guys can see right here. And of course whites has always stayed relatively low. Now let's see what else we got. From the Wall Street Journal and the JAMA report. Since 1990, rates of gun-related homicide have been the highest amongst black men aged 20 to 24, the analysis said, with 142 fatalities per 100,000 people in this group in 2021, a 74% increase since 2014. Homicide rates are as much as 23 times higher among black men, as much as nearly 4 times higher among Hispanic men than among white men, the analysis found. Of course, many media outlets have portrayed this violent crime surge as a gun problem, or they focus on the COVID-19 pandemic. Chris Reeves, a co-author of the JAMA study, said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal that for stemming violence in groups that have high homicide rates, there are certain programs like violence prevention, firearm buyback programs, and safe storage. Really quick, I personally don't see how buybacks would actually work. Safe storage, I'm not going to get to the weeds on this one because most gun owners have a safe place in the house. It's not like an actual safe, but like me, for example, I keep it in a certain area, keep my stuff in a certain area of the house where somebody cannot get to it, and therefore it's readily available in case I need to break glass in case somebody tries to break in. This hardly seems like a gun storage problem. The idea that this is an unprecedented spike in violent crime can be blamed on gun stretches of all common sense. After all, the cities that experience the highest violent crime spikes in America are all run by Democrats. Of course, Chicago, Lori Lightfoot. New York, Eric Adams. Of course, that was Bill de Blasio before he took over. But I'm pretty sure you guys get the point. And all have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. It's not like there's been some dramatic increase in firearm purchases to match the increase in homicides we were seeing. Clearly something else is going on here. Isn't it interesting that the start of the historic gun homicide surge coincided exactly with the rise of Black Lives Matter, defund the police protests, and urban riots? CNN got through an entire long news piece on this study and never once mentioned this inconvenient little fact. Now, really quick, the media serves, in my opinion, it serves to inflame. Now, guys, this right here is where I'm going to speak on the riot section of this video. Now, guys, I'm going to tell you guys a quick little story, okay? I was here at my home on, I want to say it was the second or third night of the George Floyd riots. And I want to say it was that night there that the riots in Atlanta had started. Now, we're not going to get that far into that case because it was an open and shut case. Old boy was running away. He pointed his taser at the officer, which, by the way, a taser can be considered to be a deadly weapon because let's say you tase someone, they go down, they're incapacitated, you run over there, grab the pistol. By the way, YouTube, nobody is advocating, so please don't delete this channel. It's according to YouTube's community guidelines now. They can now get rid of you if you say anything that's even perceived to be violent. So I want to go ahead and make that perfectly clear. This is not an advocation. Don't you think if an officer is incapacitated, don't you think if somebody had the opportunity to inflict some form of retribution, they might would do it? I mean, think about it for a second. And you see, at that time, I noticed something was going on. Over the second or third day of the Atlanta riots, I noticed that a lot of white people, primarily Antifa, were pushing African Americans forward. And I got to thinking to myself, I was like, these people literally just recreated the Operation Human Shield scene from South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. If you've never seen the South Park movie back from 1999, of course, if you have, you just may remember that scene. Operation Human Shield, Operation Get Behind. Yeah, that's what it was. That right there is actually what I saw. You see, I've been telling blacks for a long time that white liberals were not their friends. White conservatives will always be honest how they feel. The white liberal will never be that way. They will stand up. They will, how do I say this? They'll grandstand. They'll virtue signal. They'll claim that they'll want you to have reparations. But in reality, what they really want is they want you to get away. It kind of goes to the whole assimilation, non-assimilation argument. You see, conservatives, we want for people to assimilate themselves in society. That includes Hispanics, that includes African Americans. We like to see everybody every day. We like people to be able to assimilate with one another. Whereas liberals, on the other hand, don't want assimilation. It's kind of sort of how they are. Now, guys, we're going to go ahead and finish off the rest of this little bit of this article. I just figured I would go ahead and kind of mention that because you see, the riots fuel. I mean, don't you guys remember violent but mostly fiery but mostly peaceful protests? By the way, there's going to be a project in the future about riots themselves. It's strictly for riots, and we're going to talk about the Chaz. This is, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone that happened in Seattle. Don't worry, we'll be discussing that. But I did come across a good project on there earlier today. I think I'll leave it in the description box or the comment section. I advise you guys watch it and pay very close attention. Let's see. Maybe that's because it was the elite media alongside woke activists who relentlessly pushed the racial reckoning narrative while cheerleading the defund the police movement and making excuses for the mostly peaceful riots. The pandemic has long since receded, but the violent crime has not. There's every indication that this year has been as violent or more violent than the past two. City police departments already on their back feet politically and or suffering abysmal morale due to poor leadership and often struggle to keep up with the problem. As I've noted repeatedly, the retreat from aggressive policing alongside the defunding the police and other anti-law enforcement actions have fueled a kind of national Ferguson, Minneapolis effect. It's no surprise that Minneapolis is one of the cities hit hardest by a violent crime spike. Of course, we're talking about the George Floyd riots here. It's a perfect storm. Some people in these cities aren't too happy with the situation, but woke activists in places of power keep trying to create laws and anti-law enforcement policies anyways, as Zachary Farian wrote in the Washington Examiner. The city of Minneapolis, which started the summer of Black Lives Matter protests, riots, attempted to abolish its police department, even though a plurality of 47% of black officers opposed replacement. 47% of black voters opposed the replacement of the Department of Safety, and 75% of black voters thought the city should not cut down the size of the police force. Now, let me say this really quick. If you cut your police departments, what do you think is going to happen? Now, I would bring up the state of New York's policies on crime recently, the laxing of the punishments, the mere fact that even gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin got attacked at one of his campaign events with a knife. I would go through all that, but instead I'm going to direct you to Sean Fitzgerald for that. He lives in New York. He's got a better idea of what's going on, and he can better convey what's going on in that city and what's going on in that state. So we're not going to touch on each and every single policy. Just want to go ahead and throw that out there. But just know this right here. If you create an environment where criminals are running around, after a while there is going to be attempted retribution. Now, the reason why I bring this up is it kind of goes back to what I was saying about riots. You see, what I did not mention about the Atlanta riots was this here. As I was sitting at home watching everything, I was kind of thinking to myself, the state of Georgia is it's a pretty, let's just say that state's packing a lot of heat, a lot of gun owners. And I've been saying for a while that gun owners, about 99.9% of gun owners are mostly peaceful. Once again, YouTube, nobody is advocating for violence or anything. I'm just simply talking about causation or the mere fact that this did not happen, and I was surprised. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because, like I said before, it makes you wonder exactly how much are people going to be willing to take, especially when you have rampant crime, you have rampant stuff going out of control, you have rampant chaos. It just makes me wonder if something is not about to go down or something's not about to happen. Now, we'll be doing more projects on that in the future, but here we go. Perhaps the city's getting what they voted for. Let's see. Still, it's clear that even in the bluest cities, there are many people who have grown tired of the lawlessness that has been the cause of death of so many. It's not looking like it's going to take an enormous effort like the changes that was made in New York in the late 1990s. By the way, that was under Mayor Rudy Giuliani. To get this problem under control, as philosopher George Santayana, I'm probably just butchered his name, observed, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And that right there is actually what is happening right now. We are kind of dooming ourselves. And as I've said before, crime as a whole, and violent crime especially, is definitely up. Now, the reason why I bring this up is I want you guys to think about something really quick. And don't worry, we're going to look at one more chart, and then we're going to look at the cities. You factor in that African Americans, you factor in the fact that blacks are not having children at a high rate, you factor in that they have the highest abortion rate, you factor in that they have the smallest... they have the smallest overall birth rate, and they have the smallest overall percentage of the population itself. You see a lot of Hispanics coming in, taking jobs, which, by the way, is going to create more poverty, especially when it comes to lower skill jobs. And don't worry, we'll talk about education a little bit later on, and black education and what the problem is going on there, but I want to get some more data before I tackle that, so that's probably going to be a project later on down the road. When you factor that in, you look at crime and you look at the fact that the media fuels, and I mean they fuel the incessant chaos and the incessant rampage, all the protests, all the riots, all the violence. People, by the way, get killed in those violence, most of which are black. When you factor that in, it makes you wonder if black people are not, in fact, being replaced. Fox News article, but we're going to look at this very, very brief video first, and then we're going to actually read the article. It's an actual pretty good find. These are actually the people who originally brought this up. Of course, Fox News is everybody's boogeyman. I've often said that Newsmax viewers are just the old, jilted Fox News viewers that are pissed off about 2020. I think most of us are, but still at the same time, though, it's very, very important to note. But I'm bringing this up because once we get done with this, we're going to look at the actual cities themselves. We're going to look at like 3 or 4 of them and see exactly who the hell's in charge and who the hell's been in charge for a while. I can probably tell you that without actually pulling up the numbers. I can probably just screenshot the stuff in. But still, though, we need to take a look at this.
Set homicide records last year. New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago amongst those that saw a huge rise in killings. But beyond the statistics, who are the victims in these tragedies? Well, Matt Finn dug into the numbers. He is live in Los Angeles to tell us what he found. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Dana. Fox News submitted Freedom of Information requests to those 16 cities that saw homicide records, also to the big 3, New York, Chicago, and LA. And the data we analyzed show that overwhelmingly black males were the #1 demographic killed in those cities last year. In the city of Chicago, 648 of the 797 homicide victims were black. Also last year, 36 times a 27-year-old black person was killed in Chicago. Black males, also the leading demographic killed in cities like Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Columbus, Ohio, St. Paul, Minnesota, Atlanta, Georgia, and Louisville, Kentucky. And here in LA, Hispanic males were the most killed. This city has a higher Hispanic population than black. And we sat down with Cortland Bridges. Her 28-year-old daughter, Kai Thomas, was shot and killed in Venice Beach in December of 2020. 2 of her alleged killers were just arrested. Bridges tells us her daughter was not a gang member, instead a loving mother, and she describes the pain of losing her child.
It's an undescribable pain. It's a piercing pain that I don't think any mother should have to experience. But this crime is horrible, and there's no accountability. The judicial system is failing our children.
We also spoke to a Los Angeles prosecutor who works in DA George Gascon's office. He blames the soft on crime policies here in Los Angeles and other cities across the country.
People that are really being affected by these types of crimes are people of color. 50%, since basically the early 90s, 50% of victims of homicide have been primarily black men.
And sadly, Dana, the data shows so many children were killed across the country last year as well. Send it back to you.
What an important report, and thank you for digging into that. Thank you.
Now, gang, I gotta say this. All right, where the hell is BLM at? Seriously, where the hell is BLM at with all the homicides in Chicago? Where the hell is BLM at? You see, BLM is a group of trained Marxists. That is what they are. By the way, speaking of Baton Rouge, I mentioned Sean Fitzgerald earlier. He did a very good video that I'll try to leave in the comment section of this video on New Orleans. I advise you guys look at that because that's another hot spot for crime, especially violent crime. And it's also a very, let's just say it's a pretty well diverse place. Now, as I mentioned before, most minorities live in bigger cities, but then you will also see that a lot of minorities live in small towns as well. There's kind of a divide there. And we'll try to touch on that here. But the fact of the matter is that BLM, for the most part, is a trained Marxist organization. Keyword, trained Marxists, meaning that they are trained to be Marxists, meaning that they're not really and truly Marxists. I'm pretty sure you guys remember Patrice Cullors having mansions, having money given to her. Of course, she was paid a lot of money to do the crap that she did. That's why I'm saying they were trained. They were trying to bring in a Marxist ideology because they were actually trained to do that, but yet they live like a bunch of capitalists. I've also mentioned other people in the sphere, especially the left-wing sphere, the left-wing content creator sphere, that are very, very wealthy, telling you that they're communists and they're socialists. However, they live in mansions. They're not really what we call communists and socialists. They don't really care about that. They're just anarcho-capitalists. They got paid. It's just a great big giant grift. That's what it is. And so that's a grift that's kind of like leading people into what's going on today. So, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 105 of the city's 133 homicides were black males. In Columbus, Ohio, 135 of the city's 204 were black males. In Louisiana, in Louisville, Kentucky, 133 of 197 victims were black males. St. Paul, 17 of 38 were black males. Let's see. In Los Angeles, 397 people were killed in 2021, the year the most since 2007. Hispanic males were the top demographic killed in LA last year, 183 in total. The city has a much larger Hispanic population than black. Okay, that right there for the most part is the basically what you guys saw right there on the television. What you just saw right here on the internet. Now, guys, we got to be asking ourselves a question. Somebody's going to be saying that this is probably behavioral. I think it's mostly culture, but we'll be touching on that a little bit more here in future projects. I want to keep it primarily to crime and crime statistics because as you guys are seeing in the numbers, as you guys are seeing in the current events, it seems to me with this current border crisis that a certain population, a certain race is in fact being replaced. Cities with most amount of murders, and of course this number is active. I'm going to be leaving an article from CBS, and that article, the reason why I'm not covering it here is because if I was to cover it, it would probably take about 3 hours. It's got 66 total cities, and by the way, there are a lot of cities that people did not think about. Some of these cities, by the way, are right here, okay? We're going to read pieces of this article really quick, but I want to go ahead and throw this out here. There are certain cities that were in that list on CBS that, quite frankly, just were not mentioned. Some of those places right there in some areas that, quite frankly, you would not expect. Like, for example, the murder rate, believe it or not, right over here in Charleston, South Carolina, even though it's not mentioned here, is actually pretty high. The murder rate in Baton Rouge, Louisiana is pretty high. The murder rate in Birmingham, Alabama is pretty high. Of course, it's not mentioned right here. These are pretty red areas. You also see the murder area. You also see the murder rates in certain states, like say certain towns you would not think of that are in very, very blue areas, like Peoria, Illinois, which by the way you're seeing right here in Chicago. Chicago's 2.761 million is where the most amount of actual murders occur. Now you're seeing over here, you're seeing the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 1.6 million people live there inside the actual city. It's another city with high amounts of murders. New York, New Jersey, 321,000. You're not seeing New York. I guess it's not mentioned here, but here you also see the population. Detroit, Michigan, 616,000. Las Vegas over here, 659,000. Oakland, California, 455,000. A lot of cities that were in that list, the CBS article, which, like I said, will be in the description box, are cities that, quite frankly, you did not expect. Somehow or another, the murder rate in Chicago was actually relatively low in that metric, but yet the overall amount of death that comes out of that city as far as murders is concerned, when it comes to black on black, it was very, very high. Now, I think a lot of this has not been updated, but we're going to look at it anyways. I wanted to find one with a chart. Let's see. The United States, of course, and that's covered down here. Don't worry, we'll get to it. The United States is the 128th safest country in the world according to Global Peace Index. The U.S. safety rank has decreased each year since 2016. A large factor in determining the safety index of countries is their murder rate. In reality, the murder rate is actually, I would say it's actually become less and less safe since about the early 2000s, especially since terrorist attacks in the country have actually gone up. But let's keep going. The murder rate varies greatly between the cities in the United States. Violent crime rates escalated after World War II and peaked right between the 1970s and 80s. Oh, those glorious 1970s. Crime rates overall are affected by several factors. Factors that influence crime rates include lower arrest probabilities, social influences, family structures. Of course, family structures is also something else that we're probably going to be talking about when it comes to this topic, especially when it comes to black replacement, because the black culture has been shot down a lot over the years, which is sad too. Especially growing up in the South, being around a lot of black people, you find that black people are very traditional, they're very religious, and they do care about their families. But the culture, of course, is kind of taken, and white people have definitely taken a nosedive in the culture. We see a lot more video game culture, which I think video games, and by the way, I am a gamer, I'm saying right now, if you look at a lot of these, guys, these left-wing Twitch streamers and stuff, what are they doing? Playing video games the entire time. It's like all they do is just sit around and play video games all day. It's a big-time problem. I think people are abusing it too much. Crime in metropolitan statistical areas tend to be above the national average. Many attribute the high violent crime rates to gangs and gang violence in urban areas. The United States also has mass shootings occur on average every 200 days. These mass shootings drastically bring up murder rates in the cities in which they occur. Now, really quick, speaking of mass shootings, when you dive into the numbers, and don't worry, we're going to be doing videos on mass shooters, you find out that most mass shootings in the country are actually committed with pistols. Now, what constitutes a mass shooting? Well, typically what constitutes a mass shooting is multiple killed. Okay, it depends on the variant of how many are actually shot. You had one that happened in California recently where a guy took a pistol and he went down there and gunned down 10 people. Sometimes a mass shooting is 2, sometimes it's 10. However, we did find out from Pew Research that, once again, the vast majority of shootings that occur in this country, the vast majority of gun deaths are actually suicides, most of which done with pistols. I think it's right around 64%, but don't worry, we'll probably come back to that at a later date. A common misconception is that cities with larger populations have higher murder rates. New York City, for example, has a population of 8.39 million people, but with 300 murders and a murder rate of 3.4 in 2007, it doesn't even add up to the top 50 cities. Now, let me go ahead and touch on this really quick. As I've said before, if you have a higher overall population, and this murder rate, by the way, is looking at overall murder rate. We're not even looking at the actual murder rate amongst race. We just kind of touched that just now with the Fox News article. The lower the percentage of population in the country, obviously the more death that occurs in that said population is going to be magnified, meaning that that race is kind of sort of what I've been saying for a while now. 12.6% of the population, but yet the murder rate's through the roof for that actual population. It feels to me like that race is being exterminated. Let's take a look at this really quick. St. Louis, 69.4. We oftentimes forget about St. Louis. Baltimore, 51.1. We always forget about Baltimore. New Orleans, Louisiana. Sean Fitzgerald did a video on that a while back. Detroit, 39.7. Cleveland, 33.7. Las Vegas, 31.4. Kansas City, Missouri, 31.2. Memphis, we just had Memphis in the headlines. 27.1. Newark, 25.6, right outside of New York City. Chicago, once again, 24. Well, Cincinnati, 23.8. So you see, a lot of these cities are cities that, quite frankly, have been forgotten about, okay? And about 3 weeks ago, Philadelphia was actually sitting at number 1, believe it or not. Fact of the matter is that you are seeing a massive amount of death, okay? And it's mostly in black communities. We just touched on a good portion of this earlier. Now, here's the thing. Now, let's go ahead and finish reading this further. St. Louis, Missouri has the highest murder rate of any U.S. city and 69.4 murders per 100,000 people. In 2017, 205 people were murdered in St. Louis. The high likelihood of violence is attributed to parts of the city such as East St. Louis that experience conditions that increase this likelihood, such as unsafe housing, a failing economy, and poor school systems. Like I said, this is all fodder for another day. The Las Vegas murder rate is 31.4, which includes 58 people who were tragically killed in the 2017 mass shooting. Of course, that right there being the shooting that occurred in the hotel room. Although murder rates in U.S. cities were extremely high compared to other countries, some cities are experiencing their lowest murder rates in years. Newark, New Jersey had 72 in 2017, down from 94. That's still a lot, though. In New York's 300 murders in 2017 was the lowest they had since the 1950s. Still, though, pretty freaking high. And, of course, I'll leave this right here in the description box to go along with the other articles. However, you will notice the correlation with all of these cities. They are all ran by one single party, the Democratic Party. The number 20, according to this list, I want to say is actually Jacksonville, Florida. But still, at the same time, these places have been ran by Democrats for years. Now, gang, here's where I'm going to technically end this video at. Fact of the matter is this right here. They've been exterminating an entire race for years. If they can't exterminate it, they found other ways of actually taking care of this. Another thing is community organizing, which, by the way, we'll probably touch on in part 3, especially when we get into the whole weeds about diseases and which diseases are more likely to affect each community, meaning each race. And, of course, community organizing is important because community organizing to a lot of these people is how they separate certain racial groups. I think it was Martin Luther King had even said that he had experienced racism in the South, but he never realized exactly how bad racism was until he got to Chicago. Of course, you have photos of the Newark race riots. You have those riots, the busing riots in Boston. Fact of the matter is that's way worse up north than what it is down south. I want you guys to go ahead and understand that right now. But when you factor in the border crisis, you factor in the black murder rate, you factor in the black abortion rate being so high, and the black birth rate being so low, it feels to me like what we've been saying for a long time about the Democratic Party trying to replace a certain key voter base with Hispanics. It looks like it's becoming very, very much a reality. Guys, I wanted to do this video right here to kind of bring to light some things that are actually going on. We'll be doing part 3 on this in the near future. And, of course, some of these projects will get updated years from now with better overall technology. I'm not operating on the most, let's just say the finest of technology here. I'm operating mostly off my MacBook, but still at the same time, though, make sure you guys stick around. Also, if you like this content, make sure you guys hit that like button for the algorithm. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe. If you want to subscribe, please do so. Also, make sure you guys hit that notification bell. And to go on top of that, make sure you guys leave a comment in the comment section. I'm going to get you guys thoughts. We're going to be doing more studies on this, so make sure you guys hang around. And I'll see you guys later.